Hello, I'm Shruti Kumtekar, Marketing Manager at Kloves. Thank you for joining us in our Kloves monthly webinar. Today's webinar topic is Change Management and CMDB. Mike, can you move on to the next slide, please? Agenda, I'm going to take a couple of minutes to go through housekeeping and talk about Kloves. Our panelists from QUICKNEXUS will tell us about the company and the services that they provide. This will be followed by a presentation by our two panelists and finally the Q&A. Next slide. This webinar will be recorded and you will be able to access it later. For Q&A, you're on mute. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A section in your Zoom control panel and our panelists will answer them. If you have any questions that are not directly related to the webinar, please email me at shruti@closing.com or sales@closing.com. Our social media channels are listed here. You can access our previous webinars at our Kloves YouTube channel. Next slide. A little about Kloves. We are a ServiceNow partner since 2011 based out of Santa Clara. We are a full ServiceNow shop with 150 plus customers and close to 50 consultants, and we have been executing projects globally. Next slide. We provide end-to-end services. Our focus most recently has been on customer service management, end user portals, HR service management, and also kiosks. Next slide. Our panelists today are Mike Nelson, technical consultant at Kloves Inc., and Shivraj Bichare, ServiceNow CMDB and ServiceNow Discovery SME. With this, Shiv will next tell us a little about QUICKNEXUS, and Mike will then proceed.
Perfect. Hello, everybody. I'm Shivraj Bichare, and I work at QUICKNEXUS, where we focus exclusively on the CMDB and ServiceNow. We've done over 100 implementations of CMDB over the last couple of years since our existence, and more than half of those, so 50 of them have been with ServiceNow Discovery. We are a bronze technology partner, and we have a featured product, Discovery Admin, on the ServiceNow store that automates the configuration, maintenance, and troubleshooting of ServiceNow Discovery and Service Mapping 100x faster than an experienced ServiceNow Discovery administrator, of course, all of it resulting in an accurate and reliable CMDB. Now, we're not going to be talking much about that. This is all about the change management and CMDB today, but I am a speaker at Knowledge. On Thursday morning, I have a session where I talk about the technical aspects of all of this stuff works. And I believe there are 200 seats available, 180 have been filled up. So if any of you are technically inclined, definitely look up that session for Thursday morning. It'll be very easy to identify that. And I would look forward to seeing you guys in person there. But with that being said, Mike, let's jump right in.
Okay, just to make sure that everyone can hear me all right?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so what I really want to talk about as far as change management is the management of change management. Okay, so we always look at how many different ways there are to create this data, how to make it consistent, and some more efficient ways to keeping the data entry more consistent, and by doing that, by saving time and making the process more streamlined. So I kind of want to talk about, give a little introduction on my thoughts here, okay? Because most of us are creatures of habit. We like doing things that are familiar to us, especially when we're in a hurry. So when we're creating a change ticket, for example, we're just trying to fly through the motions, get things set up, making things that we think are correct and going down the right steps, but we are creatures of habit. Okay, so an example of that is, you go to the grocery store, you always follow the same route, especially if you're in a hurry. And the same idea for entering in data. You pick something, you've always used that particular CI, for example, and it's close enough, let's go ahead and use it. But is that the correct thing to do for this particular change? Okay, so even though, and also, another idea is maybe I'm always doing the change management for a particular upgrade, but this time my partner, and we've grown so much that there's actually 2 of us that are doing this upgrade now. And will that person do the same thing in the same way? And so we're really looking at data that's going to be processed after the change ticket, and how are we going to be able to find this data, whether we're reporting on it or maybe GRC is looking up to make sure that this change has been done properly and efficiently. Okay. So how can we do that? One, we got to make sure that we have the right configuration items for this particular change ticket. Are we grabbing the right one so that GRC can find it later? How else can we do this? Also by creating templates on a particular change. So I'm going to really focus on templates a little bit and further down, because I know Shiv's going to do a fantastic job on configuration items. Okay. And then I'd like to also get into the types of change. And I got a little bit of a theory here going on that I like to call moving to the norm. So when we get there, we'll talk a little bit about that. But the whole idea of this webinar, at least this part of the webinar, is to keep it simple, make things easy to find, make it easy for the user to complete their tasks. Okay. So next slide coming up. Okay. Configuration items. They keep expanding throughout the course of ServiceNow. Okay, so hopefully your business is growing, so you're going to add additional applications. Okay, whether it's a new software, whether it's more users being added, and as users are being added, then we're adding additional components. So whether that means more computers, more different software, more phones, more network, all these are going to add to your configuration item file. Okay, and it's not like they go away. We have history that's being kept. Okay, so you may have to weed through an old software package, and hopefully we're already filtering out those items that have been retired, because you want to keep your configuration item clean, and when a configuration item moves to a retired state, more than likely you're not going to be bringing that back up into a change ticket. Okay, so at the very least we should be filtering out those retired items. With all the new discovery tools coming on board, you can really see configuration item file expand from there, because it's going out and it's grabbing every part of the network that could be set up, depending on how you have discovery set up. But it could be entering in configuration items that may never see a change ticket, but you never know. So you want to be able to filter that out. So long story short, your business is growing, configuration items are growing. How can we filter that best? Okay. So you can see this is just kind of a quick slide on some configuration tables that I've come across. They get quite large. It could be anywhere from just out of the demo box. If you have the demo data, there's just under 3,000 configuration items. And as you add there in your own instance, just playing around. But there's other companies, that can have 54,000, 510,000, even 3.4 million configuration items. So the whole idea of this is, how can the user find the right configuration item to fit their needs? And the big part is to make sure that you're grabbing the right item so that it's being reported on later. Okay, so in the GRC process, for example, could be looking for a different configuration item that they're reporting on, where the user put in that password change, for example, and GRC is looking for a financial password change configuration item or something like that, where it could just miss on finding that result. And the GRC process may say, hey, this process isn't being done, when actually it is. So then you got to search it and make sure that you get it right. I talked a little bit about being creatures of habit, and I'm famous for this. Once I get a process going, I'm always doing the same thing. And I kind of see ServiceNow helping us out with that same strategy. Okay, so this is just an example of creating a change ticket. Once you start hovering over a configuration item or any drop down or find list for that matter, ServiceNow helps us by showing our recent selections, which is great. But what if this isn't the particular item I'm looking for? If I was in a hurry and yeah, I'm working with GoodLink, but I wanted GoodLink reporting in this particular case instead, but I didn't take the time and I just grabbed management server. Okay, so how can we filter this and make things right so that the user gets the job done correctly for all parties involved? Okay, so how can we help with this? One idea is to filter these down. Okay, so right out of the box, configuration items in change management are filtered by company, which is great, except for a lot of us have one company in ServiceNow, and that didn't help us. But there's other ways, and you got to look at how your business is structured so that we can help filter these. We talked about retired CIs. At the very least, those more than likely should be filtered out. In our previous screen, it already showed us that requested by was entered. So maybe we could filter out that responsible for based on what that person is responsible for. So maybe there's many columns in configuration item that could help us populate that. Okay, so for example, be managed by or owner of. We have supported by, for example, or even better yet, support group. Am I a member of this support group that has this configuration item? So it would only be working with those items that I may be responsible for. Whatever you do, just try to make sure that it fits. You want to make sure that the user has the tools available to them, so that if they are looking for a particular configuration item, that they do find it. But it's nice to filter these out. Another good example may be category. Okay, so category in the previous screen was also before configuration items. So if I select a particular category, maybe that just shows there's a rule that sets up that only the configuration items for that category may be used. Okay, so I kind of wanted to not just have this all about slides, but also kind of take a look at this a little bit. Okay, so if we're creating a change ticket, and we bring that up, what's the first thing we see? We see out of the box, normal changes, standard changes, and emergency changes. Okay, so if I click on normal change, at least for now, it tries to populate all the defaults for me. Okay, you can see that requested by is populated, service administrator. Category is not populated at this point in time. So if I do go look at all the configuration items of the demo data, you can see that I have 2781 configuration items, and I have to start filtering through these to find the right one. Okay, So like I said, we could work on having the requested by just be, the configuration items just show up that I may be a part of the support group, for example. Or we could do break it by category. Okay, so if I came in here and selected software for the category, then looked at the list, you can see it cut it down to 5. Now, granted, this is just demo data, but look at how much it already tailored things down. Okay. Other example is if we change category to hardware. Okay. Now, if we looked up all the items in configuration item, I got it down to 702. But still, we could do a combination of things. Maybe the requested by only has access to certain computers. Okay, why would I need to know anything about Chuck's IBM when it's just me working on this, for example? Okay. So let's take this a step further. Okay, what else can we pre-populate? You see that just starting this change ticket, yeah, the default values are populated, but what else can be populated? And that's where templates start to come in. Okay, templates. I've always been a great advocate for this and having customers create as many templates as they can to do their jobs. Okay, so have them not only create templates for different scenarios, but make sure that they populate as many of the fields as possible. One, is so that data is consistent. Okay, so every time you do this type of change, it's always the same, easier to report on, especially if you got it right the first time. Then GRC can report from it, and other managers can look at their particular configuration items and know that the changes are always consistent. Okay. I've also strongly encouraged them to put as much information in the description, short descriptions, implementation plans, and so forth, even if it's something that could be easily deleted. Okay, so the idea here is populating as much information and even have and or ors in there, so that when the change request is created, they can go in there and say, okay, we're not doing this particular portion in the implementation plan. Maybe we're doing, maybe the template was written for a full upgrade, but this may be just an incremental upgrade. So we're not doing as many changes, for example. I've also encouraged them to do changes that happen often, okay, like restarting a service. So you create a template for this. It's already pre-approved, so it doesn't have to sit there and go through CAB approval. It's already been approved, so it makes the process much easier. Other things that I've encouraged, like creating a backup. You're just creating a change ticket to do a backup. Maybe you're also, this is just part of your monthly routine to make sure that backup gets restored as a test, or maybe we're looking at backup procedures, that these tests are being done on a monthly basis, so that the controls in place to make sure that that's being done. Changing an admin password, maybe that's done every quarter, for example. That could easily be a template, and it's always the same. And again, GRC can look at that particular process and know that that admin password is being changed every quarter against the rules that are set up for your company. Okay. Another quick example to throw out there. I had a user, he was the Sandman. He had many templates for everything that he did because he knew that if there was something wrong with the sand, that he would rather spend his time working on that sand to get it back up instead of just filling out a change ticket, waiting for it to be approved to something that he knew he had to fix, whether it was rebooting a section of the sand or replacing a card somewhere, whatever it took to get that service back up. Also using these templates, you can really fill out the implementation plan, the test plan, backup plan if needed. Another great source now is you can create tasks within here so that you know that the resources are available. So if I had a template for a project that was going to be upgrading particular software, I know that I need resources from other departments. I may need the database administrator to do his portion of the backups before we go with this implementation. Or maybe I need a test environment, so I'd need an infrastructure person to set up a virtual machine for our test environment to do our upgrade, and other tasks that we may need different resources from. Once you have all these templates set up, and I can't stress this enough, make sure that you're in the habit of reviewing the templates, okay, to make them better or update them, especially after a big project. So I've been kind of throwing the example out of updating a particular software package, for example, for a change ticket. After that upgrade's complete, go back and look at those templates and make sure that maybe there's an additional step that needs to be taken now, or maybe part of it's obsolete, that the upgrade got better, where you don't have to have certain backups or stop certain processes, that's all taken care of now. So always go through your templates and make sure that that they still work. Also review your changes. Okay, so as a change manager, you should be looking at all the changes that are coming through on a weekly, monthly basis, and start looking at them and say, okay, this change happens several times a month, and maybe we ought to create a template for it so it's more consistent, to make it easier for reporting and easier for GRC, or just easier for managers to manage the process. So always look at that. Okay, so I kind of want to look at a template that I created. Okay, so this is just a quick example. Going in here, looking at a template. As soon as we get a refresh here, there's a couple things I want to look at. Okay, so we have all the values here that we could populate, and some of it is quite extensive. Okay, let's see, implementation plan is what I was looking for. Okay, so it's got some step-by-step information that may or may not partake, and we can at least look at this process and say, okay, maybe when I create this change ticket, we're not doing this whole section 12 anymore because it's not applicable. So it's easy to delete that out of the change request, but at least you have it there to think about what processes need to be done. Okay, so looking at this, also a kind of a cool thing I want to bring up is the statistics. Okay, so you can look at these templates. This is part of managing it and seeing, okay, these change tickets are or this template is being used. It's working well. The change count is 100%, even though we only have one. And if there's anything that's unsuccessful, why is it unsuccessful? Is it something in the template that's making this go wrong? Okay, so just kind of an idea of looking at that, and then let's go ahead and run one. So we got a standard change here, the 3-log upgrade. As soon as I select it, the template's going to populate all this information for me. Okay, and as a user, I may have a lot of this stuff saved somewhere else. You know, if I didn't have a template, because I wouldn't want to rewrite this, recreating the wheel every time I've done something like this, even if it's years out. Hopefully you're not doing an upgrade on a system every month. Hopefully it's much less than that. But even if we look at ServiceNow, it's kind of looking at once to 2 times a year. And a template helps in several ways. One, it helps you be consistent with that data, but also helps you remember certain things to do. So whether it's something that you're using quite often, or something that you're doing once a year and you need to remember all the steps. So it helps in either way. Okay, and the thing I want to stress about templates is it's already something that has been approved. Okay, so the CABS knows that this is the process you're going to follow, and it's been approved before, especially if it's something simple like restarting a service. There's no reason for this to become a bottleneck, waiting for a CAB group to get together, which usually is once a week. So it could be a bottleneck that really needs to get done now. Not that it's an emergency, which we want to really limit those emergency changes, just because even the sound of it's scary. So these pre-approved templates work really well for that. Okay. Also, you don't want everything going to the CAB. Okay. So I know a lot of changes may not go to the CAB, or you may have things selected, whether it goes to the CAB or not. But let's try to keep all this white noise away from CAB approval. If it's something that's simple, that needs to be done, that's always done and done correctly. Okay, because you got to keep in mind who's in your CAB group. You know, usually these are the masters of a certain area in your business. Okay, so they're sitting in a room for an hour every week that they're going through all these, and it's just a better part of their time to be doing something else if it's something that you're doing, that you know about, and it's going to be done right anyway. So having more templates can definitely change the flow of all the change tickets and get things done faster. Okay, so with that being said, I want to look at the different changes. Okay, so out of the box, we have normal change with the description there, basically going through CABS for authorization. We have standard changes. Okay, these are the templates that I'm talking about. And these changes do not require approval. And then we have our emergency changes. Okay. One thing we could do is just change the order of them. Now, again, creature of habit, I always grab the first thing I see. May not be reading, I want to get the job done. Just by changing that, that'll remind me as a user that maybe I should be using the template. Okay, so maybe we can start changing the normal process of what change is being used. Okay, so more standard changes jump up on top, and I have the word routine after that just because it is. You're kind of getting into a routine of that change, and perhaps, hopefully, at least that would be the goal, is to get this as the standard, okay? So then more normal changes, as you go through and define them, you figure out how it can become a template, okay? So then you have a lot more of the normal changes that you used to do is now has a template and becomes a standard routine change. So hopefully, you know, you're increasing the changes that are now templates instead, okay? Of course, you have those normal and kind of changing the name there a little bit to the normal exception to the rule, and these have to go through the CAB and get approval. You're always going to have your emergency changes, and that's okay. That happens, but let's start looking at those emergency changes and say, okay, this is rebooting a server just to get it back online for whatever reason. Yeah, we should be trying to come up with a problem and why is that always happening, but maybe there's a possibility for a template and having a routine change for that. Okay, I think I've covered plenty on that note, and I'm going to turn it over to Shiv.
All right, thank you, Mike. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, and let me go ahead and make this full screen. All right, so hello everybody. So Mike, thank you for the insight on change management. And when we talk about change management and the CMDB specifically, I've seen so many use cases where folks are doing change management but not referencing the CMDB. And this is a callback to what Mike mentioned before. Sometimes there's just too many CIs, right? Or the CIs aren't accurate and reliable, and there is no good way to get control on those CIs. So people just say, you know what? I'm just going to use text. I'm not going to reference the CMDB, and I'm going to do change management that way. Now, that is okay if the use case really supports you in that context, but the reality is the true value of your investment in ServiceNow does or will be just multiplied by so much more if you reference the CMDB as a part of your daily operations. Now, what happens is the CMDBs, we've heard so many statistics, CMDBs fail and all that, 70%, 85%, take a number, but it's really very high. So what I'm going to focus on is there is many reasons why CMDBs fail. Let's zero in on how to get control of those many reasons. And the takeaway for you guys is when you look at what's going on in your organization, if we can focus on, hey, here are the problems that we know, here's a very easy way to identify the problems, and here are the solutions, you can get closer to getting an accurate and reliable CMDB, which then you can have your change management process embrace that. And it works, kind of both ways, right? A great change management process controlling the CMDB, and a great CMDB supporting the change management process. So I'm going to talk about the 5 categories of problems that you could typically have, any situation, any scenario why your CMDB would fail would fall under these 5. And once you understand these, we'll talk about the solutions so you can start getting control over those problems one by one and get better with your CMDB. So the 5 categories are maintenance, isolation, tactical, process, and leadership. And I'm going to get down to maintenance. And if there is anything you take away from what I'm talking about right now, that it is always about maintenance, right? That is it. CMDB is an ongoing effort, and the rubber hits the road after the CMDB implementation project is complete. Very often, we've been involved with CMDB implementations, and it's a great go live, great, everybody's happy about the way the CMDB looks. But what customers often forget is that now is when everything starts. So the project is a way to get started, but the actual meat of it, the actual work happens once the go live takes place. Isolation. So an isolated CMDB is built without the consideration of how the data is going to be used. And Mike, you mentioned about using it for change management. Well, that is a great way to think about how you want to use the CMDB. Now, what happens is when you're looking at an isolated CMDB, if you're not using the data, right? Like, so if you have 500,000 CIs and you're only referencing as a part of your change management process, maybe only 50, 100, 500, the remaining 400,000 and odd CIs are essentially going to just dwindle away. They're not going to be used, and thus an isolated CMDB rapidly diminishes in value because there's no reason to maintain or enhance the quality of the data. So that's a very important consideration. Tactical, right? So we all talk about, hey, you know what, we got to centralize our data. We have data in too many silos, right? But the worst thing you can do is have all of those silos in one place and have a bunch of siloed data in one location, right? So the worst thing is having silos across your organization. The second worst thing is having all of those silos in one place, right? What we really want to do is make sure that when you're making these decisions, right? I mean, they may seem appropriate at that time when you're doing this tactical decision to get the data in, but what really ends up happening is you end up spending way more time to then normalize, figure out all that data. So when you're looking at the CMDB, and if you sense a tactical approach, you're just pulling data in just because, that is definitely a red flag. Process. So Mike talked about how important it is to manage your change management process, right? So the same way the successful CMDB is not about just the data. In fact, as I talk more, data is such a small percentage of what it takes to have a successful CMDB. And the same way as incidents are managed via incident management, changes are managed via change management, the CMDB requires, the CMDB is managed via the configuration management process. And if I told you, you're doing changes, but there's no change management process, you're going to look at me funny, right? The same way, if you're doing a CMDB and you do not have a configuration management process, that is something you definitely have to be thinking about. And if you don't have that, there's a very good reason your CMDB may not be successful. And leadership, right? So blame your boss. I'm just kidding, but the data stored in the CMDB is it's maintained, right, across numerous teams within the business. And for that reason, if there's a lack of leadership, the resources just don't have the time to, the effort, the inclination, the motivation to maintain that data. So the way we look at leadership is if your manager and the manager's manager, they don't have that involvement, they don't have that CMDB in their mind space, just don't do it. You know, it may not be worth taking that effort, and you need that leadership support to make sure that there's that ownership of the data and it goes top down so that the CMDB is accurately maintained. And that kind of goes back to what I said before, which is if there's anything you take out of it, it's always about maintenance. So let's talk about what we can do about it, right? So again, it's these 5 categories, and I'm hoping that with this, you can identify, okay, we've fitted these categories, and here are things that we can do within your organizations to improve the accuracy and reliability of the CMDB. So ongoing, right? And I'm going to use the M word at least 5 more times, right, in the next few minutes. But it is always about maintenance, and you have to consider the total cost to maintain the CMDB. And this is the kicker here is that, you know what, if you cannot or have not budgeted for, or there's no budget to maintain the CMDB on an ongoing basis forever, just don't do it. Don't do that scope. Don't do that CI class. Don't do that effort, because you may put in some money up front, but that is pretty much going to go waste if there's not a good plan to have something scoped for the future, right? Now, data-driven, right? So we've already spoken about how you can leverage change management, but the point really is that when you are referencing the CMDB, so the simplest way, right? How do you ensure that a process is using the CMDB? Mike already showed that to you, right? There was a reference field configuration item that was referencing the CMDB, and in ServiceNow, that is the simplest way to make sure that your CIs are referenced as a part of the process. Change management, incident management, requests, anything that may be, that's a great way to do that. And what that does is when people are forced, and when I say forced, I'm saying making that attribute mandatory. When that happens, you're forced to, or your users are forced to reference the CMDB, and that's the cycle I'm talking about, right? Users are forced to reference the CMDB. What that does is it drives the attention to the data that may not be up to snuff. And that drives the circle to make sure, hey, we have to maintain that data, and you have more and more support from a process standpoint. You have more and more buy-in from the organization, and that will help improve the accuracy and reliability of your CMDB. Now, I already spoke about this, which is the strategic nature, right? We do not want centralized silos of data. That's the second worst thing that can happen to your organization, right? So the strategic approach is not about just centralizing the data, but saying, hey, you know what, this data is already there. How would ServiceNow put the data centrally in the CMDB? And we leverage those data models in ServiceNow in the CMDB. And of course, the costs are higher upfront, but it totally reduces the TCO of the CMDB maintenance. And again, I'm focusing on the word maintenance. Is you are going to don't look at the CMDB as a project, look at it as something that you want to do consistently all the time as a part of your ServiceNow implementation. Now, we spoke about process, and process is absolutely important. The official term for that process is SACM, Service Asset and Configuration Management, and it is the underpinning process to govern the CMDB. And what this does is it goes way beyond just the data. So it talks about the people, the roles and responsibilities, of course, the design of the CMDB, the operations in this case, which is managed with change management, reporting, and governance, which also Mike mentioned before. So defining and understanding all of these aspects is very important for a successful CMDB. And when we recommend this to customers, sometimes we say, you know what, understand everything you need to do from a configuration management standpoint. And it's okay to say out of the 20 things that configuration management recommends you do, we're only going to do 5, and the remaining 15 things we're going to do later. That's perfectly fine. But do not go in or do not approach the CMDB without having a plan or a process to wrap it, to govern it, to nourish it. So that's really what we mean by saying having a SACM strategy or a configuration management process. And in terms of the leadership, I'm actually going to take it up a notch, right? Because I'm going to take it up all the way to the CIO, because the most successful CMDB implementations happen when the CIO of the organization has CMDB in their mind space, if you know what I mean, right? So if you roll all the way up, right, if you're working on the CMDB that's on your radar, and your manager and your manager and your manager rolls all the way up to the CIO, what that means is that you're getting that top-down support. You're getting support across different teams within IT. But most importantly, you can also handshake over the business, because guess what? The business services and all of that is so important. For it to be in the CMDB, you need a C-level support. You need that C-level involvement to make sure that it is a part of every conversation. And that what happens is the CMDB, as it's a part of every conversation and an enhancement that you may do, it increases the utilization. Of course, then it makes sure that it's maintained properly, and thus it increases the accuracy and the reliability of the CMDB. So if there are any of these, the categories, the 5 categories that we've covered, if there's something that you want to ask us in the comments or comment, and if there's any use case you cannot map to these 5 categories, please ask us the questions. We'd be happy to answer in terms of how it maps to these categories, and then how you can approach that subset to go ahead with making sure the CMDB is accurate within your organization. Now, with these problems and solutions, there's a few other things that are very important as you're approaching your CMDB. So here's what we've heard from customers, right? When we start a CMDB initiative, right? When we start any initiative for that matter, we have to make sure we are speaking the same language. And the reason is obvious, right? We come from different backgrounds. So I may say CIs, I may say asset, I may say asset management, I may say configuration management, right? So when you're starting your CMDB initiative, it is very important that you align on the key definitions, and those definitions are driven by what is recommended by ITIL, of course, but tweak them to how they are interpreted within your organization. That's absolutely very important. And here are some definitions that you should be considering around CIs, attributes, categories, CMDB, SACM. But these are things that you have to define, you have to communicate as a part of your CMDB initiative. Then we talk about confusing terminology, right? So when you talk about confusing terminology, there's things that ServiceNow may call something that's very unique. People new to ServiceNow, they obviously have to get very comfortable with that. There may be some terminology that people come up with and say, hey, does this really mean XYZ within this organization? So we have grouped that into the fundamentals in terms of how those definitions are. We have some additional grouping in terms of how we recommend the clarification of confusing terminologies to take place. And of course, we have to make sure that how ServiceNow uses those terms and how you intend to roll that out to your ServiceNow users, all of those are categorized. Now, I cannot get into too much detail here, but the message really is clarifying these confusing terminologies, and of course, getting into the key concepts of the approach, the alignment and maintenance within your organization is absolutely very important as you approach the CMDB, and of course, any initiative that you're taking out. Now, when folks are considering the CMDB, or maybe starting the CMDB, or maybe revisiting their CMDB because it's not working as expected, very often people ask us, okay, where do we begin? How do we start? So we're recommending this very simple start, talk, walk, deliver, close approach. And I'm going to, again, we're only a few minutes more leaving time for Q&A. So I'm going to cover this at a high level, and hopefully that gives you enough to dig deeper into what you need from a where to begin standpoint, right? So start is about, of course, making sure everybody's aligned, making sure you have the right stakeholders. But the talk and walk is really what I want to talk about, right? So the talk is about having the functional conversations. So don't have these large meetings, have these one-on-one functional and technical conversations with the teams that you have identified. And after that, spend time perusing their documentation, spend time looking at the ServiceNow implementation, spend time looking at the process and the technical documentation to get the complete context that you need. And typically what happens as a result of this is you have a deliverable that you obviously would review with the folks you're working with, but that really gives you the roadmap. And the reason we focus so heavily on the people is because sometimes people ask, what's the scope? Where do I begin? What's my scope of the CMDB? What do I focus on? Well, the simple answer is focus on people who are willing to talk to you, right? Focus on teams who are willing to work with you, because that's what's going to get that first iteration of an accurate and reliable CMDB in your ServiceNow implementation. It's going to attract more people because the initial team is going to see those benefits of a data-driven process, and that's just going to snowball into more and more people adopting the CMDB. So contrary to, you know what, we've got to start with the Windows servers and Linux servers and this, just start with folks across the business, across IT, across the different teams who are excited, who are willing, who are encouraged, who have the allocation, the time and effort to work with you. Make sure whatever you put in the CMDB is accurate and reliable. Do not make the mistake of having any junk in the CMDB. That way, more and more people trust it, more and more people use it, and that's going to help you get to a great place. So that's a little bit on where to begin. Of course, there's a lot more details on this, but again, I want to make sure I cover some of the other concepts in terms of what we do to have a CMDB done right. Now, once we have the alignment, we understand the problem solution, we have the alignment, people know what we're talking about, we know where to begin. Process is absolutely very, very important. And I already spoke about that as a part of the, one of the solutions, which is you need to have a configuration management process, or SACM in short. So the way we look at process is you do process the way you do pretty much anything and everything, right? You plan, design, run, report, and audit. And these are 5 phases of configuration management. The way I look at configuration management is, in terms of planning, it's all about the roles and the people. When you talk about design, it's about the definition, the meta aspect of your CMDB, not just the data, but the precursor to the data, which is making sure you have the table structures correctly in place. Run is all about the data and, of course, change management, which Mike referenced before. Reporting, these are the categories of reports that would fit in your use case. Correctness, completeness, compliance. For folks who are familiar with ServiceNow, you've already seen that on the CMDB Health Dashboard. Of course, you have process and archiving report categories as well that you can consider. And audit is, of course, making sure that your CMDB, you have a good way to control not only just the data in your CMDB, but the design and process as well. And what we recommend is, after you do all this, only then get into the technology. The technology is the enabler, the process, the alignment, the OCM. All of these things are so important to make sure that your CMDB is successful. And then when you get into ServiceNow, I did reference our application discovery admin that automates the maintenance of ServiceNow Discovery. It builds on, it's not an alternative to ServiceNow Discovery, it builds on the ServiceNow platform. But that apart, independent of if you have Discovery or not, or whatever your CMDB data population strategy is, you need to understand how the ServiceNow CMDB is structured, the data populations, and a few other things to consider to make sure that your CMDB is accurate. Of course, discovery admin, and then a few other things that I don't want to get into right now. But if I really have to summarize the things you want to consider when you're looking at an accurate and reliable CMDB, I look at technology as something that you would do at the end. It's the enabler. I would definitely make sure you have that process in place and understand the various aspects of what you need to do to govern the CMDB. The assessment, if you don't know where to begin, having those conversations, getting that roadmap, making sure, of course, everybody's speaking the same language, identify the solutions that work for your organization, and of course, make sure that any of the problems are addressed or identified so that you can, of course, go down the path. So kind of going down top to bottom, problem, solution, alignment, assessment, process, technology, and kind of wrapped it up all the way back. All of this hoping from a takeaway standpoint that you really understand what it takes to build an accurate and reliable CMDB. And with that, Shruti, over to you.
Thank you, Shiv, and thanks, Mike. That was great. I think we can now move to the Q&A section. Everybody, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A section in your Zoom control panel, and Mike and Shiv will answer them. To begin off, we have a couple of questions. So Mike, this one is for you, and it came up when you were speaking about the templates. So the question is, can we set approval process for change management?
Yeah, so it's all taken care of with different workflows. So as far as for change management, you can set up who needs to approve what. You can even specifically look for different CIs. I suppose that would be pretty granular. I guess I would go something, well, in the configuration management, you have an approval column there. You could say that that group needs to approve that particular CI. If you're talking about templates, yes, straight out of the box, you need to, a template needs to be approved. So once one's created either by a user or by change management, it goes to the change manager out of the box, who would more than likely bring it to the cabs, do a review on it, make any changes, send it back and forth, whatever needs to be done until it's finally approved. And then that template would be available for use. Okay. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. Shiv, this is for you. What are the key metrics for CMDB? How should audits be initiated and facilitated?
Sure. So I'm looking at the question as well, and the key metrics, right? The way I would look at it, since we're all living on the ServiceNow platform, is the correctness, completeness, and compliance. So your metrics going to be revolving around that, and I'm going to talk about how you would initiate audits and all of those things, right? So in terms of the correctness, the metrics are around orphan CIs unintentionally left active in the CMDB, or we talk about stale CIs or duplicate CIs. So your first category of metrics from a correctness standpoint is driven from these, the orphans, the stales, and the duplicates. So your metrics would be revolving around that. You know, can I minimize my orphan CIs? Can I minimize my stale CIs? Another, just a quick aside, is what we have implemented for one of the customers, and just a kind of an intuitive flow to the metric is if a CI is not discovered for more than 2 weeks, it gets into a maintenance state, right? And that maintenance state triggers a notification to the folks who are owned by and managed by on that CI to ensure what's gone wrong with the CI. Is it not being discovered because something's wrong with it or something like that? That reduces that staleness from a CMDB standpoint based on when it was last discovered. And then if it actually is going in for retirement, that CI, then it rolls into a, you know, if it's not discovered for 4 weeks, a little more than 4 weeks, then it gets into the retired state. So that's the way we really control that state or that staleness when it comes to the CMDB. So that's the first metric. The second metric is the completeness. Again, this is all of the CMDB health dashboard. And I mentioned this a little before about the mandatory aspect of it and the recommended aspect of it. And I love to give this example of the Comcast remote, right? You have 50 buttons, only 2 of them actually work, right? So you want to make sure that what people see on the form is what is really consumed and the form is well populated. So the mandatory and the recommended attributes, again, talk about the incomplete forms, talk about making sure that that portion is taken care of. The metric is really around the percentage of completeness when it comes to looking at the data in the CMDB. And of course, you can extend that to CI relationships as well. And all of this is again displayed in the CMDB health dashboard. And the third question is actually the compliance, which I'm going to lead into the how do you compare or likewise, right? So in this case, it's really about the actual and the expected values. And I see the question around how do you compare that with, you compare it with AD, you compare it with SCCM, right? So the irony is, you know, it's almost like if you trust AD and if you trust SCCM, the way we look at it is integrate that data into the CMDB, okay? Instead of comparing it outside with a third party, it just adds so much more effort and flow if you want to do that. So integrate that. CMDB just doesn't mean you're going to populate with discovery or manual. If you trust the source, get it in there, and that is your source of truth. Now, if that is the source of truth, then how do you validate the data, right? How do you know that it is actually correct or complete? Well, that's where we talk about the data certification process. So in the audit, ServiceNow has I believe it is included pretty much in all the ServiceNow licensing. They have a GRC, I'm sorry, they have a data certification application, which is very powerful when it comes to controlling your data. And the things that you bring up is how often you're going to run your your certification, what are the attributes and all of those things. So barring comparison with other tools and other data, if you really trust the data that you're going to compare it with, get it into your CMDB, and then have a data certification process where the way we look at it is if it's automated, you would have it such that you sample. So out of the 10,000 records, you sample 5, you sample 10, and you can apply that to the rest of the things. If this is accurate for these records, it is accurate across the board. And then for the logical and the manually maintained stuff, we recommend you go down a less often, but a very rigorous certification cycle where you have the owners actually validate the data. So hopefully this covers, the 3 main categories in terms of the correctness, completeness, and compliance, in terms of how you would tie that with what these categories mean from a metric standpoint and how you tie that with your data certification. Let me know if there's any more clarifications to what I've said so far.
Okay, so we're getting a few questions related to access to the slides and the material that's covered in this webinar. Just to let everybody know, this webinar is being recorded, and I will send out the link to the recording in about a couple of days, and you'll definitely be able to access and all of this information and listen to the webinar as well. There's another question here related to CMDB. Correctness of data within CMDB. Any recommendations on how to ensure correctness of the data being inputted?
So this is all about the accountability, right? So this actually is more of a process question, and I kid about this, but very often what happens is, if you're the data owner and I'm the administrator, right? So you say, hey, I want to update this data, right? So you put in the request, and then I update it. And then I say, did I update the correct data? And then you approve it, and then we close the ticket. So there's like 5 interactions for a simple data update. The best way to ensure that the data is accurate in the CMDB is to reduce the overhead of the maintenance of that data and keep the maintenance of that data closest to the person who knows most about the data. And another word for what I just said is delegated data administration. So when you're talking about accuracy, I'm going to split it up into the logical stuff and the technical stuff, right? The infrastructure stuff. That should be typically automatically populated, and you trust the technology. So that's where the data is accurate from that standpoint. The logical stuff when it comes to people is 2 things, right? One is get it as close to the people, because at the end of the day, they're going to be verifying it, right? And the second is you have to make sure that you work with people who have the time and effort, right? So again, it goes down to an OCM. It goes down to that standpoint. And then the third thing is making the processes data-driven. So it feels like a very different approach to this, but the only way you're going to ensure that somebody is maintaining the data is if they have accountability, because something else is going to break if they don't do their job. And if that something else breaks, they're under they're held accountable for that, right? So if I'm responsible for maintaining my CI, and if there's approvals, escalations, prioritization, and all of those things happening for a change ticket or an incident, and if I don't maintain the CI and somebody wakes up at night because I miscategorized my information or I put the wrong information and the routing happened incorrectly, somebody's going to tell me, and I'm going to be, it's not going to be good for me. And those kinds of process-driven, OCM-driven, leadership-driven motivations with a very low overhead for maintenance of the data with delegated administration of the CMDB is really going to help you keep that data accurate. Now, the more traditional answer is data certification, blah, 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 all that stuff. But the real way to do it is to make sure that that data is a part of a process and that cycle continues. Of course, there's some initial pains to get that going, but once it works, it just goes a very, very long way. Hopefully that helps answer the question in a couple of different angles.
Okay, so one more question. I think that's all the time we have for here, and then we can take the rest offline. Most teams in management request for the real-time CMDB. Do you recommend discovery be run every day?
Great question. So if I have to give you a one-word answer, no, I do not recommend discovery be run every day, but I'm going to add more to that, right? Do not run discovery for everything, okay? However, what we do recommend is run a targeted discovery at the end of a change of a change window. So it could be a weekly change windows, it could be a daily change windows, however that is, because guess what? Your CI should not be changing unless there's a change ticket associated with your infrastructure CIs, right? Then in the grand scheme of things, unless there's logical and all of those things, but you're talking about discovery here. So my take is, at the end of the change cycle, design your schedule such that you can do a targeted discovery or you can do a small range discovery so that whatever has been changed as a result of that change cycle is updated in your CMDB. But don't just do a full scan or likewise, because it's just going to take too many resources. Many of you have really large infrastructures and that's not even feasible. So that would be my recommendation. Right, and I know we're at the top of the hour. If you have more questions, of course, we're at Knowledge, so Shruti, you may want to call that out, and they can, of course, meet us in person, and we can take it from there. Go ahead, Shruti.
Yes, absolutely. We look forward to meeting you at Knowledge, and these are our booth numbers. So this Kloves at 1318 and QUICKNEXUS at booth number 1330. Thank you, everyone. And I know there are some questions we couldn't get to. We will answer them definitely offline. And if you have any more questions, do email us at sales@closing.com. So thank you, everyone. And see you next month with our next Kloves monthly webinar. Have a good day.